Okay, we are going to be reading chapter 6 of David Copperfield today. But we're not just going to read it, we're going to talk about the interesting phrases and vocabulary that we find as we read through David Copperfield. And of course, I will explain anything very complicated, and there's a lot of very complicated things in here. If you are watching this live with me, then if I don't mention something that you're confused about, please just write in the comments, ask a question. I will be monitoring the comments, and I will be happy to explain anything that causes you any type of confusion. Okay. Well, let's start first. Oh, wait, I'm still getting everything ready to go. We'll be starting in a second. Okay, let me just get something done here. All right. Let's go. So we have, I enlarge my circle of acquaintance. Actually, I'm going to put the word acquaintance up here because I can't tell you how many people I've met with advanced vocabulary, intermediate vocabulary, and then they don't know this word, acquaintance. Let's put it up here. And acquaintance means to be familiar with something. So if you have a friend, that's somebody who you know very well. But if you have an acquaintance, that's just somebody who you're familiar with, not exactly a friend. So it's a very common word, actually, but I'm always surprised at how many people are not familiar with this word. Right. So I enlarge, I make bigger my circle of acquaintance. So Davy is now making friends with people at his new school where he's at. All right. I had led this life. He's just starting his new life in a school away from home for about a month when the man with the wooden leg began to stump about with a mop and a bucket of water. Now, a stump is used to describe, especially like if you're missing your hand or you're missing part of your arm, then we call that a stump. And this man, I think, had a wooden leg. It's been a week or so since I read chapter 5. So when he says he's stumping about, that means he's walking around, but not like a normal person, like a person missing a leg, probably making a sound, boom, 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 while he's walking. So he began to stump about with a mop and a bucket of water, from which I inferred that preparations were making to receive Mr. Creakle and the boys. I was not mistaken, for the mop came into the schoolroom long before and turned out Mr. Mell and me, who lived where we could and got on how we could for some days, during which we were always in the way of 2 or 3 young women who had rarely shown themselves before, and were so continually in the midst of dust that I sneezed, almost as much as if Salem House had been a great snuff-box. All right, so he's there with Mr. Creakle, who brought him there, and school is about to start. The students have not arrived yet from their previous vacation. So it's just him and this man who brought him in the school. But there are a couple of women who are doing work, cleaning, making food, but they don't seem to be welcome in this school. One day I was informed by Mr. Mell that Mr. Creakle would be home that evening. In the evening after tea, I heard that he was come. Before bedtime, I was fetched by the man with the wooden leg to appear before him. Let's put the word fetch up here. fetch is a pretty interesting word. It means to go and get something. So when Davy says, I was fetched by a man, that means a man came and brought him. That's what fetch means. All right, let's see. Whoops. Let me make that word disappear. Okay. One day, I was informed by Mr. Mill that Mr. Creakle would be home that evening. In the evening, after tea, I heard that he was come. Before bedtime, I was fetched by the man with the wooden leg to appear before him. Mr. Creakle's part of the house was a good deal more comfortable than ours, and he had a snug bit of garden that looked pleasant after the dusty playground. Okay, let's put the word snug up here. Snug is a good word to know. That means, it's another way of saying comfortable, but it kind of means warm and comfortable. Like when you wrap yourself in a blanket and you feel very nice, like maybe in the morning, and it's very warm and comfortable. That is a snug feeling. Okay, let's see. Mr. Creakle's part of the house was a good deal more I keep deleting the wrong, I keep putting the wrong thing off. Okay, Mr. Creakle's part of the house was a good deal more comfortable than ours, and he had a snug bit of garden that looked pleasant after the dusty playground, which was such a desert in miniature. And I thought no one but a camel or a dromedary could have felt at home in it. So the garden wasn't very nice. It was more like a desert than a garden. Now, what is a camedary? I don't know what a camedary is, so I'm going to look it up here. Let's see. How do you spell that word? Oh, dromedary. That's what I don't know what that is. Dromedary. Oh, it's a type of camel. So when I look for dromedary, I get pictures like this one. Let me just find it here. Not that it's important. I've never used that word before, dromedary, but it's a type of camel. I don't know what the difference is, though. All right. Let's see. Let's go back to the book. Okay, but the playground where the children were playing wasn't very nice, and Davy was comparing it to a desert, so I guess nothing green, kind of ugly. No one but a camel or a dromedary, which is a type of camel, could have felt at home in it. It seemed to me a bold thing, even to take notice that the passage looked comfortable, and I went on my way, trembling to Mr. Creakle's presence, which so abashed me when I was ushered into it. I had hardly saw Mrs. Creakle or Miss Creakle, who were both there in the parlor, or anything but Mr. Creakle, a stout gentleman with a bunch of watch chain and seals in an armchair with a tumbler and a bottle beside him. So he's going to meet Mr. Creakle, who I guess is the owner of the school, and he has his family with him, his wife, and I guess Miss Creakle must be his daughter. And they use this verb to usher. To usher. I'm just going to put that up here. To usher. Let me show you a picture of an usher. I don't know how familiar you'll be with this. I guess it depends if you go to the theater or something like that, like a live theater. This is an usher. You know, an usher, you show the usher your ticket and he will take you to your seat in the theater. And so when someone ushers another person, they are escorting the other person. They are taking the person from one place to another place. So in the paragraph, what does he say? It seemed to me, where does he say? I went on my way, trembling, to Mr. Creakle's presence, which so abashed me when I was ushered into it. So someone took him into the room. That's why he was saying, I was ushered into it. Okay, let's bring this down. All right. Let's keep going. So, said Mr. Creakle, this is the young gentleman whose teeth are to be filed. Turn him around. The wooden-legged man turned me about so as to exhibit the placard. So remember, he has a sign on his back that says, "Be careful around me because I bite." And having afforded time for a full survey of it, turned me about again with my face to Mr. Creakle, and posted himself at Mr. Creakle's side. Mr. Creakle's face was fiery, and his eyes were small and deep in his head. He had thick veins in his forehead, a little nose, and a large chin. He was bald on the top of his head and nose, and had some thin, wet-looking hair that was just turning gray, brushed across the temple, brushed across each temple. So at the two sides, interlaced on his forehead. Oh, so like this. So the two lonely pieces of hair meet in the middle like this. But the circumstances about him which impressed me most was that he had no voice, but spoke in a whisper. The exertion this cost him, or the consciousness of talking in that feeble way, made his angry face so much more angry, and his thick veins so much thicker when he spoke, that I am not surprised, on looking back at this peculiarity, striking me as his chief one. Well, let's put the word feeble up here. Feeble. Feeble is another word for weak. So what was feeble? The exertion that this cost him, or the consciousness of talking in that feeble way. So remember, Davy says he whispered when he talked. So this is speaking in a feeble way. He's a feeble speaker, I guess you could say. Okay, let's bring that down here. Okay. Now, said Mr. Creakle, what's the report of this boy? There's nothing against him yet, returned the man with the wooden leg. There has been no opportunity. I thought Mr. Creakle was disappointed. I thought Mrs. and Miss Creakle, at whom I now glanced for the first time, and who were both thin and quiet, were not disappointed. Come here, sir, Creakle, beckoning to me. Okay, let's put to beckon up here. To beckon. It's not the most common word anymore, but I guess if you're trying to improve your vocabulary, it's good to know this word. People still use it sometimes, and beckon is like inviting someone to come. So when you beckon someone, you're saying, come here, come here, come closer. That is beckoning. So let's see, who was beckoning here? Come here, said the man with the wooden leg, repeating the gesture. Oh, wait. Come here, sir, said Mr. Creakle, beckoning me. So he's saying, come here. And that's him beckoning. Okay. I have the happiness of knowing your father-in-law, whispered Mr. Creakle, taking me by the ear, and a worthy man he is, and a man of a strong character. He knows me, and I know him. Do you know me? Hey, said Mr. Creakle, pinching my ear with ferocious playfulness. Not yet, sir, I said, flinching with pain. Okay, let's put the word flinching up here. Flinching is what you do, especially, well, most of the time when I think of the word flinching, I think of being afraid. So flinching is when you go like this. But also here the man is pinching Davy's ear, and that's uncomfortable. So Davy is pulling away and it hurts, so he's kind of flinching. He's flinching in pain. Not yet, sir, I said, flinching in pain. Not yet, hey? Repeated Mr. Creakle. But you will soon, hey? He keeps saying hey. That's a little bit annoying. You will soon, hey? Repeated the man with the wooden leg. Afterwards, I found that he generally acted with his strong voice as Mr. Creakle's interpreter to the boys. So because Mr. Creakle had a feeble voice, a weak voice, his I guess you could call him his assistant, would repeat things for him in a strong voice to make it sound more authoritative, I guess. I was very much frightened, and I said, I hope so, if he pleased. I felt all of this while as if my ear were blazing. He pinched it so hard. I tell you what I am, whispered Mr. Creakle, letting it go at last with a screw. So he was holding it like this, and then I'll tell you what I am. At parting, that brought the water into my eyes. I am a Tartar. A Tartar, said the man with the wooden leg. When I say I'll do a thing, I do it, said Mr. Creakle. And when I say I will have a thing done, I will have it done. Well, no, that's interesting. Let's put that up here. To have something done. So why does he say in one sentence, when I say I do something, I do it. And when I say I will have something done, I have it done. And the difference is, when you have something done, so this is have plus object plus the past participle, this means someone else does it for you. So that means he's going to order people or tell people what to do, and they do it. And that is the difference between doing something and having something done. Okay, we'll have a thing done. I will have it done, repeated the man with the wooden leg. I am a determined character, said Mr. Creakle. That's what I am. I do my duty. That's what I do. My flesh and blood. He looked at Mr. Creakle as he said this. When it rises against me is not my flesh and blood. I discard it. Has that fellow, to the man in the wooden leg, been here again? Wait a minute. Let's read that again. So he says, I'm a determined character, said Mr. Creakle. That's what I am. I do my duty. That's what I do. My flesh and blood. He looked at Mrs. Creakle as he said this. When it rises against me is not my flesh and blood. I discard it. Well, actually, this expression, flesh and blood, flesh means like meat. It's another word for meat. And when you say flesh and blood, you're always talking about relatives or relations. So that's why he looks at his wife when he says, my flesh and blood, because he's saying, like, my family is not my family if they don't listen to me. I discard them. I get rid of them. So it's kind of a threat that he's making to his wife while he's explaining to Davy that he doesn't care about anything except obedience. Let's read that again. So, I'm a determined character, said Mr. Creakle. That's what I am. I do my duty. That's what I do. My flesh and blood, that means my family. And he looked at his wife when he said this. He looked at Mrs. Creakle as he said this. When it rises against me, when it disagrees with me, when it doesn't do what I say, is not my flesh and blood. It's not my family. I discard it. I throw it in the garbage. I get rid of it. I don't want it. Then he turns to the wooden leg, the man with the peg leg, and he says, has that fellow, to the man with the wooden leg, been here again? No, was the answer. No, said Mr. Creakle. He knows better. He knows me. Let him keep away. I say let him keep away, said Mr. Creakle, striking his hand upon the table and looking at Mrs. Creakle, for he knows me. Now you have begun to know me too, my young friend, and you may go. Take him away. I was very glad to be ordered away from Mrs. and Miss Creakle, for Mrs. and Miss Creakle were both wiping their eyes, and I felt as uncomfortable for them as I did for myself. So they're afraid of him. He was pretty much saying, if they ever disagree with me, I will send them away. I don't want them. And that made them cry a little bit, and it was very uncomfortable, even for Davy. But I had a petition on my mind which concerned me so nearly that I couldn't help saying, though I wondered at my own courage, if you please, sir. Uh-oh, Mr. Creakle whispered, huh? What's this? And bent his eyes upon me, as if he would have burnt me up with them. So he's shocked that Davy turned around and made another comment. If you please, sir, I faltered. To falter, that's kind of an interesting word. Let's put that up here. To falter. To falter is to pause or to hesitate. So maybe Davy was a little bit courageous the first time he said, if you please, sir. But then when he had to say it again, he was a little bit more hesitant. He paused a little bit because he was scared. That's why it says he faltered. Let's see. If you please, sir. Oh, wait. If you please, sir, I faltered. If I might be allowed, I'm very sorry indeed, sir, for what I did, to take this writing off before the boys come back. So he wants to remove the sign from his back. You know, the sign on his back that says, be careful, I bite. So he's requesting to remove that before the boys come. Whether Mr. Creakle was in earnest or whether he only did it to frighten me, I don't know, but he made a burst out of his chair, before which I precipitately retreated without waiting for the escort of the man with the wooden leg, and never once stopped until I reached my own room. So when Davy said, can I please remove this sign from my back? Then the old man went towards him like he was going to attack, and Davy ran away. He ran away to his room. Okay, let's see. And never once stopped until I reached my own bedroom, where, finding I was not pursued, I went to bed, as it was time to lay quaking for a couple of hours. Next morning, Mr. Sharp came back. Mr. Sharp was the first master and superior to Mr. Mell. Mr. Mell took his meals with the boys. Mr. Sharp dined and supped at Mr. Creakle's table. He was a limp, delicate-looking gentleman, I thought, with a good deal of nose, and a way of carrying his head on one side, as if it were a little too heavy for him. His hair was very smooth and wavy, but I was informed by a very first boy who came back that it was a wig, and a second-hand one, he said. A second-hand wig. Let's put second hand up here. Second hand means not new. Whoops. Second hand means somebody owned it first and somebody bought it used. So this man is wearing a wig, but it's not even a new wig. It belonged to another person before him. So it was very inexpensive. And probably not, well, it could be, still could be pretty good quality, I guess. All right, let's see. Oh, where did we stop? I lose my place when I start putting vocabulary up on the screen. Let me find it again. Where are we? His hair was very smooth and wavy, but I was informed by the very first boy who came back that it was a wig, and a second-hand one, he said, and that Mr. Sharp went out every Saturday afternoon to get it curled. So curled means they make the circles, you know, curly wig. It was no other than Tommy Traddles who gave me this piece of intelligence. He was the first boy who returned. He introduced himself by informing me that I should find his name on the right-hand corner of the gate over the top bolt. Upon that I said, "Master Traddles," to which he replied, "The same," and then he asked me for a full account of myself and my family. It was a happy circumstance for me that Traddles came back first. He enjoyed my placard so much that he saved me from the embarrassment of either disclosure or concealment by presenting me to every other boy who came back, great or small, immediately on his arrival. And this form of introduction, "Look here, here's a game," happily, too, the greater part of the boys came back low-spirited and were not so boisterous at my expense as I had expected. Boisterous. Let's put that word up here. Boisterous. Boisterous means loud or making a lot of noise. So, I mean, you can imagine a lot of boys coming into a school, they would make a lot of noise, a lot of yelling and screaming and laughing and slamming doors and making noise, and that would be boisterous. Where did we see that word? The greater part of the boys came back low-spirited and were not so boisterous at my expense. So they kind of understood his problem. He has to wear this humiliating, embarrassing sign on his back. But most of the boys actually were very nice. They didn't make a lot of noise. They didn't make fun of him too much because of that. Some of them certainly did dance about me, like wild Indians, and the greater part could not resist the temptation of pretending that I was a dog, and patting me and smoothing me lest I should bite. So some of the boys were making fun of him and saying, "Lie down, sir," and calling me Tozer. I don't know what Tozer is. Maybe that was a common name for a dog at the time. This was naturally confusing among so many strangers and cost me some tears, so it made him cry a little bit. But on the whole, it was much better than I had anticipated. I was not considered as being formally received into the school, however, until J. Steerforth arrived. Before this boy, who was reputed to be a great scholar, and was very good looking, and at least half a dozen years my senior, I was carried as before a magistrate. He inquired under a shed in the playground into the particulars of my punishment, and was pleased to express his opinion that it was a jolly shame for which I became bound to him ever after. So Steerforth, he's like the head boy in the school. And he says he's a half a dozen years older. So a dozen is 12, which means that Steerforth is probably about 6 years older than Davy. I don't remember how old Davy is. Maybe he's 8 or 9. So Steerforth must be around 15. "What money have you got, Copperfield?" he said, walking aside with me when he had disposed of my affair in these terms. I told him 7 shillings. "You'd better give it to me to take care of," he said. "At least you can if you like. You needn't if you don't like." I hastened to comply with his friendly suggestion, and opening Peggotty's purse, turned it upside down into his hand. "Do you want to spend anything now?" he asked me. "No, thank you," I replied. "You can if you like, you know," said Steerforth. "Say the word." "No, thank you, sir," I repeated. "Perhaps you'd like to spend a couple of shillings or so in a bottle of currant wine by and by, up in the bedroom," said Steerforth. "You belong to my bedroom, I found." That's a very strange phrase. "You belong to my bedroom, I find." Okay, I don't really know what that means. Maybe it means you're welcome into my bedroom. It certainly had not occurred to me before, but I said yes, I should like that. "Very good," said Steerforth. "You'll be glad to spend another shilling or so in almond cakes, I dare say." I said yes, I should like that too. "And another shilling or so in biscuits, and another in fruit, eh?" said Steerforth. "I say, young Copperfield, you're going it." I smiled because he smiled, but I was a little troubled in my mind too. So Steerforth is convincing him to spend all of his money on wine and food and treats for the boys. And he's happy to do it, but I guess he's also feeling a little bit uncomfortable about it. "Well," said Steerforth, "we must make it stretch as far as we can, that's all. I'll do the best in my power for you. I can go out when I like, and I'll smuggle the prog in." Okay, I don't know what prog is. That must be some old word for contraband or something. Let's see. But we do have this word to smuggle. And that means to take something into a place in secret. You hide something and then you bring it in because it's not allowed. That's what smuggling is. So now people say narco traffickers. You've probably heard that term, narco traffickers, before. But we used to say drug smugglers. It used to be the same thing. Traffickers kind of means sellers. But if you say drug smugglers, that's somebody who hides drugs and then takes it across the border. Now I'm just going to look to see if this word prog, let's see, P-R-O-G, prog, meaning, it's probably an old word that people don't use. Okay, informal British. Well, now could be radio program. Oh, that's all they use it for. So obviously this was before radios and TVs. So I'm not sure what prog means in this paragraph. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Okay, it's not a word that anybody uses. All right. So let's see. Oh, actually, let's put up this phrase also, make it stretch. Make it stretch. And then let's find some pictures of stretching. Maybe you know this already, but you might not know how they're using it here. But before we talk about what it means here, let's look at the real meaning of stretching. Okay, stretching is making something bigger or longer. So here's a picture. See, this woman is stretching. She's stretching. She's making her body bigger. Can we find something else with stretching, maybe, besides people? What if we put rubber here? Rubber, stretch. So if you look at this rubber band, okay, that's stretching the rubber band. That's what stretch means. It means like making things bigger, making things tenser. But we also use it when we're talking about money. If you don't have a lot of money, when you say making money stretch, that means taking a small amount of money and getting the maximum for it. So Steerforth is saying, oh, we'll buy wine, we'll buy treats, we'll buy fruit, it'll be wonderful. And Davy's thinking, I don't think I have enough money for this. And so Steerforth is saying, we can make it stretch. We can get a lot of things with this money. We don't need a lot of money. So that's actually a pretty handy phrase that we still use all the time, making money stretch. Okay, so we must make it stretch as far as we can. We must make it stretch as far as we can. That's all. I'll do the best in my power for you. I can go out when I like, and I'll smuggle the prog in. I don't know what prog is. The contraband, the things I'm not supposed to have. With these words, he put the money in his pocket and kindly told me not to make myself uneasy. He would take care of it. Should be all right. He would take care. Wait, he would take care. It should be all right. Okay. He was as good as his word, if that were all right, which I had a secret misgiving was nearly all wrong. For I feared it was the waste of my mother's 2 half-crowns, though I had preserved the piece of paper they were wrapped in, with a precious saving. When we went up the stairs to bed, he produced the whole 7 shillings worth and laid it out on my bed in the moonlight, saying, there you are, young Copperfield, and a royal spread you've got. I couldn't think of doing the honors of the feast at my time of life while he was by my hand shook at the very thought of it. I begged him to do me the favor of presiding, and my request being seconded by other boys who were in that room, he accepted to it. So Steerforth went and bought this wonderful feast for all of the boys. And he gave all of those things to Davy, because since Davy paid for it, it should be Davy who hands everybody something. But Davy was very young and very nervous, and he didn't think it was a good idea for him to do it because he was so young. So he asked Steerforth to be the person to distribute the wine and the food. And the other boys agreed that he should do it too. So he did. As to me, I sat on his left hand, and the rest were grouped about us on the nearest beds and on the floor. How well I recollect our sitting there, talking in whispers, or their talking and my respectfully listening. I ought rather to say the moonlight falling a little way into the room, through the window, painting a pale window on the floor, and the greater part of us in shadow, except when Steerforth dipped a match into a phosphorus box, when he wanted to look for anything on the board, and shed a blue glare over us that was gone directly. A certain mysterious feeling, consequent on the darkness, the secrecy of the revel, and the whisper in which everything was said, steals over me again, and I listen to all they tell me with a vague feeling of solemnity and awe, which makes me glad that they were all so near, and frightens me, though I feign to laugh, when Traddles pretends to see a ghost in the corner. So it's kind of like a magic night for him. He was afraid of all these other boys, but even if it wasn't a smart idea to spend his money on wine and food and snacks for all the boys, maybe that created a better situation for Davy. Okay, let's see. I heard all kinds of things about the school and all belonging to it. I heard that Mr. Creakle had not preferred his claim to being a Tartar without reason, that he was the sternest and most severe of masters, and he laid about him right and left every day of his life, charging in among the boys like a trooper and slashing away unmercifully. So I guess he has a stick and he just goes into the room and starts beating the boys. That he knew nothing himself but the art of slashing. This is slashing. Usually you do that with a knife, but I'm sure he's using a stick. Being more ignorant, J. Steerforth said that the lowest boy in the school, that he had been a good many years ago a small hop dealer in the borough, and had taken to the schooling business after being bankrupt in hops and making away with Mrs. Creakle's money, with a good deal more of that sort, which I wondered how they knew. So, let's see. He knew nothing himself but the art of slashing, being more ignorant than the lowest boy in the school. So Mr. Creakle is not a very smart or scholarly man, and that actually he was a hops dealer. Hops is an ingredient in beer. So he used to sell this ingredient and had taken the schooling business after being bankrupt, but he was no good in this business. So after his hops business failed, he took his wife's money, he took Mrs. Creakle's money, and with a good deal more of that sort, which I wondered how they knew. So he started the school with his wife's money, but he's wondering, how do the boys know all of this? I heard that the man with the wooden leg, whose name was Tungay, was an obstinate barbarian who had formerly assisted in the hops business. So let's put the word obstinate here. Obstinate. Obstinate. And obstinate means stubborn. So probably you might be familiar with the word stubborn, which means you never listen to anyone. You have your own opinions and you never change your opinion. It's impossible to make you change your opinion or your thinking. So stubborn is the more typical word. That's the word that you'll see most. But if you want to use fancier English, then you can use the word obstinate. And it means the same thing, but it just sounds a little bit fancier. It sounds a little bit more advanced. Probably more common in the past to use that word than it is now. So it maybe was not such a fancy word 150 years ago, but now it is. Not such a common word. Well, it's still pretty common, but only if you have a more advanced vocabulary. Okay, so I heard that the man with the wooden leg, whose name was Tungay, was an obstinate barbarian who had formerly assisted in the hop business, but had come into the scholastic line with Mr. Creakle. In consequence, as was supposed among the boys of his having broken his leg in Mr. Creakle's service, and having done a deal of dishonest work for him, and knowing his secrets, I heard that with the single exception of Mr. Creakle, Tungay considered the whole establishment, masters and boys, as his natural enemies, and the only delight of his life was to be sour and malicious. So the only person that he could be nice to would be Mr. Creakle, the owner, and he hated everybody else, and he did horrible things to everybody else because he hated them, and he enjoyed doing horrible things to everybody else. I heard that Mr. Creakle had a son who had not been Tungay's friend, and who, assisting in the school, had once held some remonstrance. Remonstrance. What is that? That means like paying or owing. Wait, let's see. Remonstrance. Oh, no. It means to be angry. But how do you say it? Let's see.
Remonstrance.
Remonstrance. But that's not a word that people use in modern English, but remonstrance. So remonstrance means being forcefully, well, remonstrate. I mean, it's not common. Angry remonstrance from resident. Okay, so how are they using it here? Let's see. Remonstrance. Where is it? Tungay's friend. Mr. Creakle had a son who had not been Tungay's friend, and who, assisting in the school, had once held some remonstrance with his father on an occasion when its discipline was very cruelly exercised. So the son saw how Mr. Creakle was abusing the boys, and he protested. He said, "This is bad. I don't like this." And then, and was supposed, besides, to have protested against his father's usage of his mother. So the father, he's mean to all of the boys in the school. He treats them badly, but he also treats his wife badly, the mother. I heard that Mr. Creakle had turned him out of doors in consequence, and that Mrs. and Miss Creakle had been in a sad way ever since. So the boy protested. He complained to his father about the way he treated the students and about how he treated his mother, and Mr. Creakle made him go away. And ever since that day, the sister and the mother have been very sad. Okay, but the greatest wonder that I heard of Mr. Creakle was there being one boy in the school on whom he never ventured to lay a hand, and that boy being J. Steerforth. Steerforth himself confirmed this when it was stated, and said that he should like to begin to see him to do it. So that's kind of I guess what you could imagine is Steerforth said, "Yeah, Mr. Creakle never touches me. I'd like to see him try." Okay. On being asked by a mild boy, not me, how he would proceed if he did begin to see him to do it, he dipped a match into his phosphorus box on purpose to shed a glare over his reply. So he lit a match, because they're in the dark, remember, in the moonlight, and he said he would commence by knocking him down with a blow to the forehead from the 7 and 6 penny ink bottle that was always on the mantelpiece. So he would take a bottle and hit him in the head with it. We sat in the dark for some time, breathless. I heard that Mr. Sharp and Mr. Mell were both supposed to be wretchedly paid. Let's put the word wretched up here. That's an interesting one. Let's see. Wretched. Wretched is a word similar to horrible. Very awful. So if you are wretchedly paid, that means you don't make very much money. You make very little money, actually. It's horrible pay. Horrible, horrible pay. I heard that Mr. Sharp and Mr. Mell were both supposed to be wretchedly paid, and that when there was a hot and cold meal for dinner at Mr. Creakle's table, Mr. Sharp was always expected to say he preferred cold, which was again corroborated by J. Steerforth. The only parlor boarder, the only parlor boarder. I heard that Mr. Sharp's wig didn't fit him, and that he needn't be so bounceable. Somebody else said bumptious. These are funny words about it because his own red hair was very plainly to be seen behind. I heard that one boy, who was a coal merchant's son, came as a set off against the coal bill and was on that account. Okay, I heard that one boy who was a coal merchant's son came as a set off against the coal bill. So the coal merchant is a seller. So one boy was the son of a man who sells coal, and the school couldn't pay the coal bill, so he agreed to send his son to the school as payment of the coal, the money that they owed. So he was going to school there for free. Well, not for free, but the father wasn't paying money because he was giving them coal, which they couldn't pay for. Exchange or barter, a name selected from the arithmetic book as expressing this arrangement. I heard that the table beer was a robbery of parents, and the pudding an imposition. I heard that Miss Creakle was regarded by the school in general as being in love with Steerforth. And I'm sure, as I sat in the dark thinking of his nice voice and his fine face and his easy manner and his curling hair, I thought it very likely. I heard that Mr. Mell was not a bad sort of fellow, but hadn't a sixpence to bless himself with. So that means I heard that Mr. Mell was a pretty nice guy, a pretty nice fellow, but he didn't have any money. Nothing. He had absolutely zero money. And that there was no doubt that the old Mrs. Mell, his mother, was as poor as Job. I thought of my breakfast then, and what had sounded like my Charlie, but I was, I'm glad to remember, as mute as a mouse about it. What? I thought of my breakfast then, and what had sounded like my Charlie. I have no idea what that means. Okay, let's keep going. The hearing of all of this, and a good deal more, outlasted the banquet some time. The greater part of the guests had gone to bed as soon as the eating and drinking were over, and we, who had remained whispering and listening, half undressed, at last betook ourselves to bed. "Good night, young Copperfield," said Steerforth. "I'll take care of you." "You are very kind," I gratefully returned. "I'm much obliged to you indeed." "You haven't got a sister, have you?" said Steerforth, yawning. "No," I answered. "That's a pity," said Steerforth. "If you had one, I should think she would have been a pretty, timid, little bright-eyed sort of girl. I should have liked to know her. Good night, young Copperfield." "Good night, sir," I replied. I thought of him very much after I went to bed, and raised myself, I recollect, to look at him where he lay in the moonlight, his handsome face turned up, and his head reclining easily on his arm. He was a person of great power in my eyes, and was, of course, the reason of my mind running on him. No veiled future dimly glanced upon him in the moonbeams. There was no shadowy picture of his footsteps in the garden that I dreamed of, the garden that I picked up shells and pebbles in with little Emily all night. All right, well, that was chapter 6 of David Copperfield. So I'm going to now make some exercises with all of these vocabulary words that we have learned from chapter 6, and I will be posting them maybe today or tomorrow so that we can practice using some of these new words that we learned. And I will see you again when we do chapter 7 of David Copperfield.